Today I put together some of the most tragic animal attack stories I've covered on this channel so far. These stories include divers getting ripped apart by great white sharks, killer chimpanzees who escape from the zoo, and much more. Hit that like button and subscribe right now. From bears to crocodiles, these are the most terrifying animal attack stories you'll ever hear. Welcome to Final Affliction. Today's story takes place in Cape York, Australia. It highlights the tremendous power of motherly instincts and how a mother is willing to sacrifice everything and leap headfirst into danger to protect the one she loves, namely her children. The Cape York Peninsula is a large peninsula located in far north Queensland, Australia. It's renowned for its unspoiled wilderness and abundance of natural beauty, with over 700 different land vertebrate species, including birds, bats, kangaroos, rodents, and reptiles like the freshwater crocodile or its gigantic terrifying cousin, the saltwater crocodile. The deadly saltwater crocodile is the largest living reptile. Full-grown males sometimes reach around 6 meters in length and weigh between 1,000 and 1,300 kilograms. The saltwater crocodile is mostly crepuscular, meaning it's most active during twilight hours. It likes to spend its days lounging in the water and basking in the sun, waiting for nightfall so it can go on the hunt. Although they're relatively sluggish, saltwater crocodiles can be agile predators and show surprising agility and speed when necessary, usually when ambushing prey. Typically, when cruising, they travel at 3 to 5 kilometers an hour, or 2 to 3 miles per hour. Also similar to others in the crocodilian family, saltwater crocodiles do not have a specific food preference and will eat whatever is available to them. Of all the crocodilians, the saltwater crocodile is notorious for its extreme aggression and sometimes unprovoked attacks on humans. This species does indeed have a long history of attacking humans who likely, while unaware, venture into its territory. Direct contact with the saltwater crocodile is likely fatal, almost certainly so if the predator manages to clamp down on his victim with its powerful jaws. The only recommended policy for dealing with saltwater crocodiles is to avoid their habitat when possible. To state that they are extremely aggressive when approached would be an understatement. It's also worth mentioning that a total of 106 people were killed by saltwater crocodiles in Australia from 1971 to 2013. On October 11th, 2004, the Kerr family was spending the evening at the remote camp situated almost 40 meters from the shoreline of Bathurst Bay. Bathurst Bay was a popular tourist destination in northern Queensland near the Great Barrier Reef. Alicia Sorahan, along with her son Andrew and his family, who were all first-timers, had been camping here for the past 6 to 7 years. Her husband Bill usually came with them too. The family went on a fishing trip to the beach. Later that day, they pitched their tents next to each other for convenience. Before going to sleep, Andrew gazed upon the beautiful night sky with his wife Diane and 4-month-old son Kelly. Because they were 30 to 40 meters away from the beach, they thought it would be quite a safe place. Little did they know about the horror that was about to come. At approximately 4 a.m., a 4.5-meter saltwater crocodile came ashore after hunting along the coast. It's unclear whether the cold-blooded beast was looking for food or protecting its territory, but what is certain is that it had no regard for the humans who were now fast asleep in their tents. As it approached, what sounded like loud grunting noises and the rustling of leaves alerted Diane, who put aside 4-month-old Kelly and leaped up to see where the noise was coming from. At first, she thought it could have been a pig, a dingo, or maybe even a wild bull. She heard the sounds of something getting closer to their campsite, and it sounded big. As Diane stared through the mosquito netting, the shadowy outline of an immense crocodile materialized just a few feet away, gazing back at her through their tent flap. Diana quickly turned to Andrew and woke him up, shouting, "There's a croc, Andrew!" Andrew leaped up and crept outside of their tent to assess the danger, but as soon as he did, the menacing and cold green eyes of the crocodile, who was now right next to Andrew, greeted him. Andrew froze solid for a second in complete fear, and before he could figure out what to do, the beast lunged at him. The croc charged into their tent, tearing the bug netting with its teeth and grabbing Andrew by the hips. Andrew was terrified and likely in an enormous amount of pain as the croc's sharp teeth tore through flesh while its powerful jaws crushed bones and dragged him towards the water. This is a common hunting behavior for crocodiles. They try to take their prey underwater, where they can finish them off without disturbance. The saltwater crocodile reigns supreme among all other predatory species by possessing the strongest bite in the animal kingdom, far outclassing that of even the ferocious bull shark or the terrifying hippo. It can clamp down on prey with a devastating force that is estimated at about 3,700 pounds per square inch. That's more than 4 times the amount of force required to shatter a human femur bone, the strongest bone in the human body. Despite what Andrew was going through, his first thoughts were of the safety of 4-month-old Kelly. "Grab the baby D," he shouted. His blood-curdling screams woke up everyone in earshot. Alicia Sorahan was jolted awake by her son's screams coming from the next tent over. Bill ran to the side of the tent, looking for an axe. Her sons had weapons with them as they were hunting pigs. She pointed her flashlight to where the noise was coming from, and witnessed in horror as Andrew was fighting for his life as the croc viciously shook his head and continued dragging him away. Her 61-year-old body may have been frail, but a mother's will and determination to protect her children are unshakable. She fearlessly ran towards the crocodile, leaping onto its head and gouging at its eyes. The croc spun around in an attempt to get away from her, but hit her, striking her down in the process and breaking both her nose and jaw. The beast let go of Andrew, who quickly made a run for it, and shifted his gaze onto Alicia, who now lay badly injured and incapacitated. The crocodile latched its teeth onto her arm and started tearing it apart, lacerating skin and mangling flesh and bone, all while once again attempting to drag his victim into the water. Her other son, Jason, who luckily had a gun close by, put his knee on the croc's head and began unloading on the vicious animal. It took 4 good shots to the head before the crocodile finally stopped moving. When all the dust settled, Andrew was lying with a broken right leg and left arm. He also had multiple puncture wounds on his arm and lower half. Needless to say, it was quite a shock for everyone when they saw him, especially considering he was less than a meter away from the crocodile who did it. Alicia was bleeding quite heavily, so her husband Bill and one of the other guys decided to put her into a Land Cruiser and drive her to the nearest place where a rescue chopper could pick her up from. The closest location happened to be a runway at Kelpawar Crossing, which was about 7 hours away by car. Despite having several broken bones, Andrew wasn't mortally injured, so the decision was made to leave him where he was while they took his mother to get help. He was helped by a first aid officer from a quarantine team who arrived via helicopter. His condition was stabilized after receiving the necessary first aid. His mother, however, wasn't faring as well. A crocodile's mouth is teeming with bacteria. The bacteria enter the crocodile's system through either the food it eats or the water in which it lives. The initial trauma of a crocodile bite is often fatal due to the creature's 60 teeth and crushing jaw power. However, some victims survive only to become infected with diseases that then lead to death or amputation. To make matters even worse, Alicia was old, meaning her immune system and resistance to infection may not be on par with her son's. Nonetheless, after patching her up and administering heavy doses of antibiotics, doctors were finally able to stabilize her condition. A few days after being admitted to Cairns Hospital, she was reported to be doing well and was discharged. I did what I had to do. He needed help and I was there, so I jumped on the croc and that was it. Andrew had feared the worst. Once it had my leg, I thought I was going to die. I thought this is it. Alicia Sorahan tragically passed away in May 2020. Until her final moments, she maintained that any mother would have done what she did to defend her son and grandson. "I'm no hero," she said repeatedly. While the family's survival is credited in no small part to the bravery of everyone involved, don't let this story fool you into thinking an encounter with this terrifying reptilian species is anything but a guaranteed one-way ticket to the afterlife. The average male saltwater crocodile measures about 5.5 meters in length, but the crocodile which terrorized the Kerr family, on the other hand, was only 4.5 meters in length. The weight of the crocodile increases cubically as length increases, meaning actual crocodiles that are 5.5 meters long would weigh more than twice as much and be much more powerful and dangerous than the crocodile in our story, who likely hadn't even reached full maturity. We must be mindful when we enter the wilderness where wild animals live, as it's their home before ours, so let us tread lightly, observe carefully, and leave nothing but footprints behind. Nature doesn't always take kindly to outsiders, as the Kerr family learned the hard way, so stay within safe boundaries, take all necessary precautions, and always come prepared, because if you don't, you may just end up as another victim of nature's cruelty, your consciousness slipping away as you're plagued with your final affliction. Port Lincoln is a town in the Australian state of South Australia on the Lower Eyre Peninsula. Widely regarded as Australia's seafood capital, Port Lincoln is also a famous tourist destination due to its stunning scenery and oceanfront environment. It's a perfect location for yachting, scuba diving, shark cage diving, and game fishing. It has an exquisitely complex ecosystem where a variety of different wildlife such as gray kangaroos, koalas, brown snakes, blue-tongued lizards, geckos, and pygmy possums can all thrive. Port Lincoln is also home to a thriving population of dangerous yet majestic aquatic sea creatures, including jellyfish, whales, and of course, great white sharks. The great white shark is without question one of the ocean's most terrifying apex predators. It stands out among other members of the shark family due to its size, with males averaging 3.4 to 4 meters, whereas females normally reach lengths of 4.6 to 4.9 meters. Although rare, some females can reach an astonishing 6.1 meters in length and 1,900 to 2,200 kilograms in weight, weighing more than most standard SUVs after full maturity. With jaws that can deliver a devastating bite force of 4,000 psi while also featuring 7 rows of gnashing teeth, the great white is armed with over 300 individual razor-sharp blades, which when combined with the insanely powerful bite force, makes it easily capable of tearing a full-grown human in half within seconds. The shark's bullet-shaped body is designed primarily for speed, easily reaching upwards of 35 miles or 50 kilometers per hour. Despite its reputation as a mindless killing machine, it's the belief of leading scientists that the great white shark is in fact a highly intelligent, highly inquisitive predator. Its primary prey, seals and dolphins, are very clever animals, and the shark has evolved a sophisticated brain in order to sneak up and outsmart them. Few can think of a more terrifying scenario than being stranded in the middle of the ocean, floating atop the dark blue waters when suddenly you are ambushed by the horrifying sight of a large gray fin circling around you. Tragically, what may be regarded as a nightmare for some people became a reality for Shirley Ann Durden and her family. 33-year-old Shirley was a housewife who lived alongside her husband Barry, along with their 4 children in an Australian town known as Karku. Ever since they got married, the couple dreamed of one day abandoning the boring old farm life and living by the beach. So when Barry told her he'd finally managed to secure a home for them near Port Lincoln Beach, Anne was overwhelmed with joy. After settling in, the couple spared no effort in enjoying their new home and would spend many days relaxing by the beach, sunbathing, fishing, and scuba diving. Life seemed perfect for the couple, and they couldn't be happier. But one day, a friend of Barry's, Keith Coventry, came over on a visit and asked the couple if they'd like to go scuba diving in search of fresh scallops while the kids played by the beach. The couple, who were no strangers to scuba diving, couldn't resist the temptation of yet another exciting day in their personal paradise. So, they readied their diving equipment and set off towards Peak Bay. On March 3rd, 1985, the trio reached their destination and began putting on their diving gear, informing the kids they'd be gone for a while. Not wanting to waste any time, the three adults went into the 7-foot deep waters and began scouring for scallops. As they were busy looking for the delicious delicacy, a dark figure was watching from the shadowy waters. A gigantic, bloodthirsty great white shark, estimated to be about 20 feet in length. Full-grown gray whites rarely, if ever, venture close to shallow waters, so the trio didn't feel the need to watch their backs or be attentive, as they knew the odds of a shark encounter is astronomically low. And even if they did encounter a shark attacks are not only extremely rare, with about 400 of them occurring each year worldwide, but only a fraction of them actually end in a fatality. Furthermore, most recorded bite incidents occur in low-visibility waters or in other settings that impair the shark's senses, as the species more often than not appears to dislike the taste of humans. According to studies, they can detect whether or not an object is worth preying upon in one bite. Humans are, for the most part, too bony for the shark's liking. Great whites tend to favor seals because they are plump and high in protein. Rather than fatal organ loss or complete ingestion, shark attack fatalities are often the result of blood loss after the initial bite. Between 1990 and 2011, there were 139 unprovoked great white shark attacks, and only 29 of them were fatal. What Shirley and the two men didn't know, however, was that this shark was extremely desperate and likely starving for a meal, as no shark would normally venture into waters as shallow as the waters they were in. After filling up their bags with fresh scallops, Barry and Keith made their way to the beach where the kids were playing. Shirley, on the other hand, was too busy admiring the gorgeous underwater scenery to notice the looming threat behind her. Finally deciding to head back to shore and join them, Shirley resurfaced and began swimming toward the beach, waving to the two men and gleefully announcing how many scallops she had managed to produce for herself. As the two men waved back, Barry noticed something in the distance, a large gray fin, growing bigger and bigger as it seemed to be dashing in Shirley's direction. Barry, who had finally realized what was about to happen, tried to warn Shirley of the danger behind her, although just before he could open his mouth, the gut-wrenching sight of the shark's gaping mouth, lined with serrated, razor-sharp teeth, emerged from under Shirley, flinging her helpless body several feet in the air while clamping down on her entire lower body with its powerful jaws. As Shirley's body slammed back down into the water, Shirley's blood-curdling screams were heard as the beast tore her apart by viciously shaking its head. Shirley continued to struggle for several seconds before the beast dragged her down into the depths below, and then there was silence. A brief period of agonizing silence that would soon be followed by Shirley's body, now missing its lower half, resurfacing face down as the water turned crimson red, as Barry shouted his wife's name. Shirley's 4 children, alongside Barry, who was in a frozen trance throughout the whole ordeal, watched in horror as the great beast had just torn apart their mother. Depending on the severity of the injury, the human body can survive without its lower half for up to 6 minutes, so it's not unlikely that Shirley was still alive after the shark let her go. Although the shock from the agonizing pain she must have endured likely helped her fall into the state of unconsciousness, which is why she appeared to be completely lifeless after the initial attack. Barry, who was still in shock yet desperate to try anything to save his wife, began running to the shore, intent on rescuing her at all costs. But before he could even jump into the water, he was held back by Keith, who knew there was nothing that could be done. In a cruel and terrifying spectacle, the shark re-emerged, its powerful jaws once again clamping down on Shirley, this time with a bite so strong it snatched Shirley's entire head clean off her body, before retreating yet again back into the darkness. With what little hope he had of rescuing his wife now gone, Barry drifted back into his frozen state, his eyes unblinking, unresponsive to Keith's pleas to step away from the waters, or his children's terrified cries before uttering the words, "She's gone, she's gone." Shirley, who was now nothing more than a lifeless, headless torso, drifted away less than 50 yards away from the family inside a pool of her own blood. Although Shirley was now gone, her tragedy was far from over. After arriving on the scene, rescuers attempted to retrieve her remains, but neither Shirley nor the beast that took her life was ever found, as it was theorized the savage shark had come back a third time for her torso before retreating into the murky waters from where it came. The tragedy of Shirley Ann Durbin to this day remains as one of the most horrific and gruesome shark attacks in recorded history. A reminder that fate is a cruel mistress and that death can strike at any time. You never truly know what tomorrow has in store for you. Life is nothing if not a sinister promise, the fulfillment of which comes much later in the form of your final affliction. The following story is regarded as one of the most brutal and horrifying chimpanzee attacks in recorded history. Our story takes place in the tropical jungle of Sierra Leone. Inside this green paradise, a wide variety of plant life and wild animals flourished until one day, war, bringing with it a never-before-seen demand for land, fuel, and resources, decimated the once beautiful landscape of this lush utopia, and none suffered the consequences harder than Sierra Leone's population of chimpanzees. What was once a thriving community of chimpanzees, bound by unbreakable family bonds and consisting of about 30,000 chimpanzees, was reduced to a mere couple of thousand due to the destruction of their natural habitat and the savage culling of these beautiful creatures by the jungle's own inhabitants, who would usually kill the parents before taking the children to be sold as pets in the local black market. This prompted several animal rights activists to call for the construction of havens where these animals would be protected from the vile greed and unceasing savagery of humans, in hopes of preserving this now endangered species. The Tacugama Chimpanzee Sanctuary is one such haven. Located near the capital of Sierra Leone, the sanctuary has been a shelter for orphaned and traumatized chimpanzees for nearly 30 years. The abused chimpanzees that sought refuge in the sanctuary were scarred by their years of abuse. For the majority of them, the slaughter of their families was their first introduction to humanity. Some had their teeth smashed in or were confined in cramped cages for days. Others were even made to consume alcohol for the amusement of humans. Regarded as a tourist attraction, Tacugama attracts visitors from across the world, bringing light to the consequences and cruelty of human expansion upon local wildlife. In 2006, Alan Robertson, Gary Brown, and Richie Goody were subcontractors working on the nearly complete American embassy when they were offered the chance to visit the Tacugama Chimpanzee Refuge. The exciting offer, made by their friend and local guide, Melvin Mama, was met with unanimous approval, and the four men called for a taxi and began the journey toward Tacugama. The cab, which carried the three construction workers along with their close friend, made the 30-minute trip up a mountainside to Tacugama on Sunday, April 23rd. As they sat inside the taxi, the four men admired the gorgeous countryside as their friend, Melvin, told of interesting facts about the country's rich history and described the jungle's stunning natural beauty. Unbeknownst to them, as their car mounted the final steep slope into the 100-acre preserve, things had gone horribly wrong on the other side. Workers inside the refuge were in the process of feeding the animals when a group of them suddenly became enraged and managed to escape the electrified fence surrounding the compound, sparking one of the most brutal and gruesome chimpanzee assaults in recorded history, as the chimps rampaged and tore apart anyone who was misfortunate enough to have crossed their path. The newly formed pack consisted of 31 young adults and was led by a chimp known as Bruno, a 270-pound, 6-foot-tall alpha who suffered from severe trauma after he was taken from his mother as an infant and sold on a market for a measly $30. It's not always the biggest and most aggressive male that commands the troop in chimpanzee culture. Instead, the elders of the pack choose a deserving leader. Even if a particularly powerful male defeats and coerces all of his rivals into submission, the chimp society of elders may not give him their blessing to lead. Alphas are charged with the burdensome duty of looking after everyone, and if necessary, defending the entire pack down to its weakest member. Aside from being the undisputed alpha, Bruno was massive for a chimpanzee, easily towering over every other member of his pack. It seemed Bruno held a deep-seated hatred for humans, despite the kindness later shown to him by sanctuary workers. Hatred which the 4 men, alongside their driver, Issa Canoe, were about to become all too familiar with. The vehicle soon came across a closed fence meant to keep unannounced visitors out. As the men sat waiting inside their car, Issa blasted his horn in the hopes that someone would come out and open the gates for them. The sound of the car's horn, however, would attract the attention of the last thing the men wanted that morning: Bruno. Bruno soon emerged from deep within the forest, accompanied by his group of loyal, bloodthirsty followers. The chimpanzees soon encircled the taxi, screaming and banging at its doors and windows as the group watched in horror from the inside. Bruno was so big that the group initially mistook him for a gorilla. Quickly realizing the danger they were in, Issa put the car in reverse and hit the gas pedal as hard as he could. As the car suddenly flung backward, Bruno gave chase, easily overtaking the speeding vehicle and standing atop the car's hood, screaming angrily as he displayed his terrifyingly sharp teeth before he began bashing the car's hood and front windshield. As the car continued to roll down the hill, Bruno would shift his focus on the rear back windows, smashing through the glass and beginning his assault by viciously mauling Melvin, biting his hand and viciously shaking his head, tearing through flesh and ripping bone as Melvin screamed and tried to fight him off with the help of his friends, but to no avail. Desperate to escape their predicament, one of the men told Issa to shift the automobile into forward gear. Upon doing so and hitting the gas pedal once again, the vehicle abruptly comes to a stop and veers off in a new direction. Bruno, whose sharp teeth now sank as deep as they could inside Melvin's arm, was caught off guard by the sudden motion and was flung back out of the same window. Alan and Gary gripped Melvin by the legs just before he was dragged out by Bruno, and the 2 men began hoisting him back inside the car. After the shock wore off, the pain began to set in. Melvin watched in utter horror and disbelief as almost half of his hand, along with 3 of his fingers, was now gone. Gary attempted to calm Melvin down, tearing off a piece of cloth from his shirt and wrapping it around Melvin's hand, which now resembled little more than a drooping mass of skin that was loosely tied to clumps of flesh. Issa was beginning to lose his grip. He was a local of Sierra Leone and knew what chimps were capable of. He had witnessed with his own eyes how a horde of chimpanzees could tear apart a human within seconds. Issa threw caution to the wind and continued pushing forward, driving right through the bloodthirsty horde toward the locked gate, with the intent of ramming through it as the others pleaded for him to slow down. Eventually reaching top speed, the vehicle collided with the heavy metal gates, a collision so violent that it briefly knocked everyone unconscious. When he eventually came to, Gary was awoken by the gut-wrenching sound of Melvin's screams. Gary looked around the now run-down vehicle, only to notice everyone had vanished. Gary turned his eyes to where the screams were coming from, only to witness that Bruno had dragged helpless Melvin out of the car as the vicious horde began ravaging him. Adamant on saving his friend, Gary picked up a sharp wooden log after exiting the vehicle, letting out an angry roar in hopes of attracting Bruno's attention. Most wild chimpanzees shy away from direct confrontation with humans, even though they are much stronger physically, as a human's natural posture makes them appear taller and more intimidating to the chimpanzee. Domesticated chimpanzees, however, or at least the ones who spent a good portion of their lives living among humans like Bruno did, quickly realize the physical advantage they possess over humans, both in terms of strength and agility. Bruno, who accepted the challenge, began the charge towards Gary, pounding and flailing his arms around as he stood on his back legs to appear taller. Bruno, who was 6 feet tall, easily towered over Gary, who was only 5'9" tall, but Gary remained calm. As the beast leaped onto him, Gary raised up his weapon, striking Bruno in the neck and knocking him down. Bruno attempted to get up, but Gary wouldn't let him. Bruno's pack froze with terror as Gary pummeled Bruno over and over with the wooden log. Bruno, who later gave up and began showing submissive behavior towards Gary, retreated back and soon vanished amid the ocean of rustling leaves and dangling vines. Witnessing the defeat of their leader, the angry horde of chimps grew ever quieter as they dissipated, dissolving into the forest from where they came. After his victory, Gary turned his eyes toward Melvin. Trying to pull him up, Gary noticed Melvin could not stand on his own as it appeared Bruno had torn off most of his right foot. After making sure the horde was gone, Gary informed Melvin he'd go and find help. As Gary traversed the unfamiliar forest, he eventually came upon Richie and Alan asking them to go and find help while he tended to Melvin. But before they left, Gary noticed Issa was nowhere to be seen. When asked about Issa's whereabouts, Richie informed Gary that after Issa's attempt at breaching the thick metal gate failed, Issa exited the vehicle and climbed over it himself, leaving the rest of his group to fend for themselves as he headed toward the main road. Gary nodded in disappointment before warning the two men to stay vigilant and watch their backs as he headed back to where he left Melvin. After Gary eventually got back to Melvin, he tied another piece of cloth around his right foot, which was nothing more than a dangling mass of torn flesh. Melvin leaned on Gary's back for support as the two made their way toward the main road, eventually coming across a military van. Apparently, Richie and Alan had managed to reach a military patrol unit and inform the soldiers of Melvin and Gary's whereabouts. The van soon picked them up and rushed Melvin toward the nearest medical facility where he would get treatment for his injuries. Gary breathed a sigh of relief as he knew Melvin and the others would be okay, yet he still couldn't believe or fully process the events of this horrific day he'd gone through. While Gary, Melvin, Richie, and Alan all made it out safely, a crueler fate awaited Issa, who was later found bloody and torn apart. His jawless, disemboweled body ravaged beyond recognition as the angry horde of chimpanzees seemed to have caught up with him, tearing all 4 of his limbs from his body before feasting on his remains. Bruno, on the other hand, could never be found. While 27 of the 31 of the sanctuary's escapees were eventually retrieved, Bruno was among the 4 who were not. Many attempts at locating and bringing back Bruno were launched, and all were met with failure. Even though sightings of Bruno are regularly reported to this day, she still manages to somehow evade his pursuers, almost as if he's developed heightened senses that warn him when he's being hunted by humans. Fitting, considering the amount of abuse he'd suffered through because of humans. The group will never forget their close encounter with death in the forest of Sierra Leone. Gary in particular suffered from nightmares for months after the terrifying incident. He considers himself lucky he'd managed to fight off Bruno and rescue Melvin, and that he'd been able to reach safety unlike Issa, who would tragically be ambushed by the savage beasts, screaming in horror as he succumbed to his final affliction. The following story not only showcases the power of human resilience and perseverance in the face of unfathomable tragedy, but also highlights the highly unpredictable nature of sharks and how far we are yet to come before we begin to understand their complex and mysterious behavior. On October 14, 1972, three men by the names of Brett Gilliam, Rod Temple, and Robbie McKelvin were on a scientific expedition to recover samples for a research project being conducted at Cane Bay on the island of St. Croix's North Shore. Gilliam described the area as having some of the best wall diving locations in the Eastern Caribbean. Even the drop-off was fairly easy, requiring no long boat trip. The team's goal was to collect some photographs and check on traps they had set up for a project. The only problem was their destination was situated on a 210-foot wall that was right next to a steep drop-off. The trio wasn't particularly worried though, not in the slightest, as they each were veterans of hundreds of deep dives. Rod served as a dive leader and timekeeper. He documented the dives and monitored ascent times to ensure everyone remained safe, while Brett and Robbie handled most of the heavy lifting. All three of them donned their gear and dove into the ocean, beginning what would soon become their ill-fated journey down the Cane Bay Wall. After reaching their destination, Brett and Robbie got to work while Rod scanned his surroundings. As he was looking around, Rod caught a glimpse of something truly terrifying. It was the sight of two white-tipped sharks off in the distance, one 12 feet long and the other marginally bigger. The oceanic white-tipped shark is a truly terrifying creature that mainly inhabits tropical and warm temperate seas. It is most notable for its long, white-tipped, rounded fins. According to recent studies, the species is becoming less common as a result of strong demand for its enormous fins, which constitute the main component of shark fin soup. It favors eating gastropods, crabs, birds, stingrays, sea turtles, and threadfin. However, this hunter will pretty much eat anything, humans included. Though slow-moving, oceanic white-tipped sharks are without question highly dangerous to humans. They are especially known to frequently attack survivors of ships and plane wrecks at sea, and are suspected to be responsible for several unrecorded human fatalities. To give you an idea of how vicious it is, the white-tip was the major species involved in what many people consider to be one of the worst mass shark attacks ever documented, ripping and mauling many of the USS Indianapolis's surviving crew after it was blown up back in 1945. It's estimated that the white-tip sharks are responsible for up to 150 deaths in that single incident alone. After finishing up their required observations, the three men noticed they were ahead of schedule and felt ecstatic, as this meant that they would only need about 20 minutes of decompression time, meaning they wouldn't have to linger for too long around the sharks. Brett later stated, "I remember thinking how strange it was to see oceanic white-tips right here on the wall at Cane Bay. It was kind of like walking off your back porch and seeing an African lion when you expected an alley cat." Robbie went up first and pointed out the sharks again as they swam by them. The crew were no strangers to these sharks, as they had their fair share of nasty encounters with white-tips when they worked offshore. The shark would frequently bite their equipment, the steel cables deployed from their research vessel, and even the shafts and propellers were targeted on occasion. These two sharks, however, looked to be unique in some way, as they didn't seem to pay any attention to them. As Brett turned around and began the ascent behind Robbie, Rod stayed behind as their carefully planned dive dictated he be the last to ascend. Brett met up with Robbie at about 175 feet just over the ledge, and they both rested on a coral while waiting for Rod to join them. However, they soon began to worry as he was growing late. Robbie looked at Brett and pointed to his pressure gauge, which showed he was beginning to run low on air. Suddenly, Robbie noticed a mass of bubble exhaust coming from the deeper water, which indicated Rod's presence down below. The two figured that Rod must have had some sort of air failure. Since Brett's air consumption was lower, he decided to send Robbie up while he went to check on Rod and see if he needed help. But when Brett reached Rod, things were about as bad as they could get. One of the sharks had bitten him on the left thigh without warning, and blood was gushing in red clouds from the wound. Brett was horrified and couldn't believe what he was seeing. Rod was desperately trying to beat the 12-foot animal off his leg and keep from sinking deeper. Brett lunged to his friend's aid, grabbing his right shoulder harness strap and pulling with all his strength. Almost simultaneously, the second shark hit Rod in the same leg and bit him savagely. Rod desperately gouged at the shark's eyes and gills as he grimly fought to beat off his attackers. In a desperate attempt to ward off his friend's attackers, Brett punched at the torsos of the hungry beast as they tore great chunks of flesh from his friend's body. The two men continued their assault on the sharks as they seemed to squirm in pain, suddenly letting go of Rob and retreating back down to deeper waters. Desperate to reach safety, Brett looked up and caught a glimpse of Robbie, who was about 100 feet above and looking in horror. But in less than 15 seconds, the first shark returned and hit Rod again, dragging him and Brett both over the drop-off. The attack had probably only lasted a minute at this point, but Rod had lost a huge amount of blood and tissue and had gone almost completely limp as a result. Brett was clutching Rod's right harness strap as the second shark came back as well. This shark bit and hung on as the two plummeted down the side of the wall. Brett and Rod were dropping rapidly. His efforts to swim back up were fruitless as the sharks continued to bite and tear at Rod's helpless body, all the while dragging the two men deeper and deeper. Brett felt Rod move again to fend off another attack, and his hopes soared upon realizing that his friend was still alive. Brett clung briefly to the edge of the drop-off wall, putting a stop to their rapid descent, when suddenly both sharks retreated once again, and Brett watched them circle their position from about 10 feet away. Brett saw one shark swallow the remains of Rod's lower left leg right before his eyes. The other gulped a mouthful of flesh it had torn off. Rod, who was likely half-conscious by now, looked up to his friend for the first time since the vicious assault began. He shook his head lightly and in pain, then tried to push Brett away, hoping to spare Brett's life and buy him some time to make his escape. Brett grabbed for Rod's waist harness as he felt his hands sink into his friend's now mutilated torso. Sadly, there was no harness left to reach for. Rod had been disemboweled. Brett took off for the surface with Rod clutched to his chest. Immediately, the sharks were on them again. Rod screamed for the last time as the second shark seized him by the midsection and shook him. The blue water turned turbid with bits of human tissues and blood. Brett was powerless as poor Rod was torn away from him. He watched in utter disbelief as Rod's lifeless body drifted into the abyss with the sharks fighting over him. The attack had started around 200 feet, and Brett's depth gauge was pegged at 325 feet, but he knew he was far deeper than that. Brett also almost completely depleted his oxygen supply. In a hopeless effort to make it out, Brett looked away from his friend's mangled body in what must have been his final goodbye before beginning his ascent towards the surface. His oxygen-starved brain was beginning to give out and the effects of hypoxia were beginning to show, but before he could reach the surface, Brett would drift into unconsciousness. Brett miraculously woke up on the surface, gasping for air. Apparently, the small volume of air in his safety vest he wore had been enough to float him the rest of the way up and save his life, but his survival was still a 1 in a million chance as he had to deal with an unknown amount of emitted decompression. Nonetheless, Brett began swimming to shore as fast as he could, but he felt his legs going numb. By the time he reached the beach, he could barely stand. A couple on their honeymoon chanced upon Brett's body as it drifted onto the beach. In an incredible burst of good fortune, it turned out the wife was an ER nurse who understood the pathology of decompression sickness. 2 days later, Brett was released from the hospital. He had astonishingly managed to survive ascending almost 400 feet without any decompression sequence, but not without permanent side effects. There was residual numbness in both of his arms and legs, along with substantial hearing loss and legal blindness in his right eye that will persist with him for the rest of his life. Robbie's last view of Rod and Brett were as the two were dragged over the wall in a cloud of blood by the sharks. He never saw Brett's ascent and so reported them both killed when he got to shore. It was not until Brett called his dad from the hospital that he knew that Brett had survived. A week later, Rob's memorial service was attended by his two friends at the beach. His body was never recovered. People are often too busy with their lives to take a step back and really think about the important things. We go through the motions day in and day out, not realizing that we may only have a limited amount of time left. Many people die without ever truly living, so it's best not to take life for granted, as just like Rod, you never truly know if tomorrow will be your last day on Earth. The day you finally come to terms with your final affliction. The average male grizzly bear can be up to 6.5 feet tall. Some grizzlies, however, have been known to reach heights of up to 9 feet and weigh as much as 1,000 pounds. Grizzly bears possess long, sharp claws that can be up to 4 inches long. They also have very powerful jaws, and their bite force is one of the strongest when it comes to mammals. A grizzly bear's powerful bite can crush a human skull with ease. Its sharp claws can easily puncture and slice human flesh, and its razor-sharp teeth can cut through muscle and bone. In addition to their deadly claws and teeth, grizzly bears are also known for their volatile tempers, and they can be extremely dangerous, especially when threatened. Despite their size, strength, and short temper, grizzly bears are generally shy and reclusive animals. They will usually avoid contact with humans if possible. However, grizzly bears have been known to occasionally attack humans, especially if they feel threatened or when protecting their young. If you encounter a grizzly bear, it's important to stay calm and avoid making any sudden movements. Try to back away slowly and make yourself as big as possible. Whatever you do, do not run, as this may trigger the bear's predatory instincts to give chase. This is the tragic story of Leah Loken, the story of a strong and fearless woman who had an ill-fated encounter with this ferocious predator. Leah Davis Loken was born on December 16, 1955 in Corona del Mar, California. She enjoyed a childhood spent horseback riding and exploring the outdoors near her home in Laguna Beach. After many years of working as a registered nurse specializing in surgery recovery, Leah moved to California and built a home for herself in 2016. Leah's horrifying tragedy began on July 6, 2021. Leah and her sister had arrived the day before at a small town called Ovando, situated in Montana. They were taking part in an ultra-endurance cycling event that ran from Banff, Canada to New Mexico, a journey of nearly 4,000 kilometers. Leah was a competitive cyclist who took part in mountain bike races. She never let her age weigh her down, and she even won the Mammoth National Champion Enduro race in July 2015 at 59 years old. In recent years, Montana's population of grizzly bears was expanded into new areas where people now live and visit. Consequently, interactions between grizzly bears and humans have becoming more frequent in the northern Rockies. It got so worrying that requests were even submitted to lift the restrictions preventing the killing of dangerous wild animals such as bears, not only in Montana, but also in the adjacent states of Wyoming and Idaho. Upon arriving at Ovando, Leah immediately wanted to go camping outdoors. She had even found a perfect spot behind a nearby museum where she could get a phenomenal view of the beautiful night sky. Her sister and friends weren't too keen on her plans, however, as they had heard reports of a wild bear roaming nearby. Her sister pleaded with her to ditch the risky idea and stay with her at a hotel, but Leah was too stubborn to heed her sister's warnings. She set up camp next to the Blackfoot River, failing to take into consideration that it bordered a forest where more than 1,000 grizzly bears roamed free. Despite the obvious risks, Leah felt relatively safe as she had not only brought with her a full can of bear spray, but she also met Texas couple Kim and Joe Cole, who shared her love for camping and erected their tent close by to hers, giving her a false sense of security. At 3 a.m., Leah was fast asleep when a hulking shadow appeared before her tent. Leah woke up at the sound of snuffling coming from nearby. She wasn't sure what it was, but it sounded big. The mysterious figure soon approached her tent, shrouding it in darkness with its shadow as it began sniffing where her head was located from outside. Leah soon realized what the figure was and began screaming for help. Kim and Joe woke up to her screams and began shouting as well. The combined noise made by this trio was luckily enough to scare the bear away, as it soon retreated back into the darkness. After making sure the bear was gone, the couple ran to Leah's side to check up on her. She assured them she was fine, and they suggested it may be for the best of Leia to pack up her things and spend the rest of the night at a hotel for her own safety.
Officers said the food-conditioned bear showed no fear of humans and repeatedly ripped open coolers and pushed on tents in search of food.
Leia told the couple that the bear appeared to be looking around for something and that it even huffed at her head. Apparently, that grizzly was food-conditioned. Grizzlies that are food conditioned have learned to seek out human food, which makes them highly dangerous as they no longer fear humans, and more often than not, associate humans with a potential meal when they see them. This is why it's important not to store any food in your tent when camping in an area where grizzly bears are known to roam, as it will only bring them closer to you. This made Leia think that by distancing herself from any sources of food that may attract the bear's attention, she could spend the rest of her night enjoying herself out in the open as she always liked. Leia scoured her tent for any crumbs of food she could find. She put inside a bag everything she thought may attract a grizzly bear's keen sense of smell, including some lentils and dried blueberries, and stored it almost 30 feet away from her tent. Finally, she thought to herself she could sleep in peace and not have to worry. What Leia failed to consider, however, was that the containers she used to store her food prior to the previous bear encounter still reeked of blueberries, something which a grizzly bear's phenomenal sense of smell can easily pinpoint. At around 4 a.m., the Coles were yet again awoken by horrifying noises. Joe realized that the noises were coming from Leia's tent and that she was being attacked, despite not hearing her yell out for help. After exiting their tent, the couple was mortified by what they saw. They quickly pulled out their can of bear spray and rushed towards Leia, unloading on the beast as it pounced up and down on our tent. After it finally had enough, the bear let Leia go and retracted back into the woods. The Coles noticed Leia wasn't moving underneath her now destroyed tent. They ripped the torn tent away from Leia's body and were mortified by what they saw. It was Leia, now sitting motionless and bloodied, her neck and spine contorted in an unsettling fashion as the nearly 500-pound beast had come crashing down on her with all its might, likely causing instantaneous death. After arriving at the scene, investigators found an almost empty can of bear spray that seemed to have been sprayed recently right under her tent. Despite allegedly moving all food away, investigators discovered a small bag of dried blueberries inside her tent, as well as a saddlebag full of food that was likely overlooked by Leia, just outside the entrance of her tent.
In national news, we have disturbing details this morning about a California woman who was killed by a grizzly bear in Montana. Wildlife officials say that the bear pulled her from her tent in the middle of the night and killed her before fellow campers could use bear spray and get the animal to run away.
Investigators theorized that Leia was awoken out of her sleep for the second time that night to the sight of the bear creeping inside her tent. Her sudden movements to grab the bear spray likely caused the bear to swipe at her neck as Leia squeezed the can of bear spray at the bear, unable to talk as the deep bleeding gashes now prevented her from screaming for help. Blinded by the bear spray while half inside Leia's tent, the bear began jumping up and down in attempts to free himself, landing repeatedly on the top of already dying Leia, breaking her bones and killing her. On the 9th of July, 3 days after Leia's death, a 4 to 7-year-old bear was seen breaking into a chicken coop and was shot by officers. DNA analysis from the bear's paws confirmed that it was indeed the one who took Leia's life. The Davis family, who had lost their loved one in this tragic event, were devastated, although hopefully they can find some comfort in knowing that the beast responsible won't be hurting anyone ever again. The tragic loss of Leia Loken at the hands of a grizzly is a reminder of how important it is to be cautious when venturing into areas where these creatures are known to roam. No matter how well prepared you think you are when stepping into wild territory, sometimes there's just no avoiding an encounter with a wild animal. And as the human population continues to grow and expand into areas that were once wild and unexplored, the likelihood of coming face to face with these terrifying creatures continues to rise. In the end, Leah's untimely death serves as a powerful warning to not only always be aware of your surroundings and take the necessary precautions, but to always heed nature's warnings and respect the boundaries of its many dangerous creatures. Otherwise, you might end up in death's cold embrace, your life withering away before your eyes as you're handed your final affliction.